What happens to the U.S. economy? After the Iran conflict, just days ago, the world came dangerously close to a full-scale war. The United States, Iran, Middle East tensions at their peak, and then, suddenly, a ceasefire. But here's the real question. What actually happened behind the scenes? And more importantly, what does this mean for the U.S. economy? Because wars don't just affect politics, they reshape economies, sometimes for years. Let's start with what we know right now. A temporary ceasefire has been reached between the United States and Iran. Pakistan played a major role in bringing both sides to the table. Talks are now expected to take place. But here's the key detail. This is not peace. This is a pause. And that changes everything. Because markets don't react to peace. They react to uncertainty. And uncertainty is exactly what we have. In fact, right after the ceasefire was announced, U.S. stock market surged. The Dow jumped more than 1,000 points in a single day. New York Post. At the same time, oil prices dropped sharply. Why? Because one of the biggest risks in this conflict is oil supply, the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow passage where around 20% of the world's oil flows. New York Post. If that route is blocked, global energy prices explode, inflation rises, and economies suffer. So, when the ceasefire reopened that route, markets reacted instantly. Stocks up, oil down. But here's where things get complicated. This reaction is temporary because the underlying risk is still there. The ceasefire is fragile, and negotiations haven't even started properly. Pakistan is hosting talks, but even officials admit nothing is guaranteed. The Economic Times. So what happens next? Let's break it down. First, energy prices. This is the biggest and fastest impact. If tensions rise again, oil prices will spike. And when oil prices rise, everything becomes more expensive. Transportation, food, production, this feeds directly into inflation. And inflation is already a problem. So a renewed conflict could push inflation even higher. Second, financial markets. Markets hate uncertainty, and geopolitical risk creates volatility. We already saw markets jump on ceasefire news, but the opposite can happen just as fast. If talks fail, markets could drop sharply. Investors move money into safer assets, gold, cash, government bonds. So volatility is not over, it's just beginning. Third, government spending. Wars are expensive. Even short conflicts cost billions. Military operations, logistics, support, reconstruction. All of this adds pressure to government budgets, and the U.S. already has high debt. So more spending means more borrowing, and more borrowing can lead to higher interest rates over time. Fourth, global trade. Conflicts in the Middle East disrupt global trade routes, especially energy trade, but also shipping and supply chains. We've seen this before. Delays, higher costs, lower efficiency. And all of that affects economic growth. Even countries far from the conflict feel the impact. In fact, central banks around the world are already warning about risks, higher oil prices, supply disruptions, market instability, the times of India. Now let's talk about something deeper. What does this mean for America's global position? Because this is not just about economics, it's about power. For decades, the United States has been the dominant global force, military, economic, financial. But conflicts like this test that dominance. If the U.S. struggles to control the situation, or if outcomes don't go as expected, it can change perceptions. And perception matters. Because global power is not just about strength, it's about trust. If allies start questioning U.S. leadership, that can shift global dynamics. But at the same time, The US still holds major advantages. The dollar remains dominant. Financial markets are still the largest in the world. And during uncertainty, investors often move money into US assets. So, ironically, global crises can sometimes strengthen the US position, at least in the short term. Now, let's look at the role of Pakistan. This is one of the most interesting parts. Pakistan has positioned itself as a mediator, bringing together the US, Iran, and regional players. And according to reports, it played a key role in preventing escalation. Reuters. This gives Pakistan strategic importance, but it also shows something bigger. Power is shifting, not completely, but gradually. More countries are becoming involved in global diplomacy, and that creates a more complex system. Now, here's the real question. Did the US lose this conflict? The answer is not simple. There is no clear winner and no clear loser. What we have instead is a temporary balance, a pause in escalation, but the underlying issues are still there. Iran has demands. The US has conditions, and both sides are testing each other. So the real outcome will be decided in negotiations, not on the battlefield. And that's where things become unpredictable, because diplomacy is slower, but more complex. Now let's talk about the future. What should we expect? Short term, volatility. Markets reacting to every headline. Oil prices moving quickly. Uncertainty dominating decisions. Medium term, economic pressure, higher costs, potential slowdown in growth, increased government spending. Long term, structural changes. Shifts in global alliances, changes in trade routes, possible changes in energy markets, and maybe even changes in global power balance. But here's the key idea. The biggest impact of this conflict is not what has happened, it's what could happen next, because the system is now more fragile, more sensitive, more reactive. And that means even small events can have big consequences. So what does this mean for you? It means the global economy is entering a more uncertain phase. Prices may fluctuate, markets may become more volatile, and economic conditions may become harder to predict. But it also means something else. Understanding these dynamics becomes more important than ever because in uncertain times, information is power, and those who understand the system are better prepared for what comes next. If you found this video insightful, subscribe for more content about global economics and real-world financial systems. And let me know in the comments, do you think this conflict will escalate again or lead to long-term peace?